Can you guys believe this? Because I hardly can. So this just in, Dead Cells another brand new alpha patch for 3.0. Though by the time I upload this will probably be one day after it was announced. Anyways, I have not seen all of the patch notes just yet. I skimmed through it, I saw some nerfs, I saw some new weapons here and there, so I'll probably be just as surprised as you are once we get into some of these changes. Starting off, I think there are two new weapons. One of them is the Panchaku, the Panchuk. It's two pans tied together by a string. Essentially, it is the weapon that the Beheaded used in the Bad Seed DLC. Now it's finally a thing. The crit condition is exactly the same as the Warpan, crits on enemies facing you, and you are going to see some footage of me using this in the background, and wow, look at that animation. I don't think I've ever seen an animation so smooth before on a weapon. So very excited to use this. Now the general feel that I have when using it is that it is good. It's very good, but I don't think it's game breaking, which in my opinion is actually where you want a weapon design to be. Not too weak, but not powerful enough to literally break the game. So if you want to whip out your inner Bruce Lee and just go to town on some enemies, now is your chance. The second new weapon is crossover content from Soul Knight, which I believe is a mobile roguelike. I could be wrong. It is the Magic Bow. It is dual colored with tactics and survival. It fires 5 slow-moving homing arrows. So one thing that immediately comes to mind is that in Hades there is this weapon aspect for the bow that does something very similar. While its homing ability is pretty insane for what I can tell, it is kind of compromised by its slow attack speed. Assuming that all of the arrows hit, it can be very, very powerful. Though I don't think this is good enough to be run on its own. You do need some kind of backup weapon to go along with it. But so far these two weapons I am pretty impressed with. You can now pet your pets when you're in transition areas. This is a very important addition to the game, if I say so myself. Next up, we have completely reworked how legendary items work, so I have not read this entire section and there is a lot to go through. I don't know how much of it I'm gonna go over, but let's take a look. Remove the double stat scaling, but kept the colorless status. They now scale with your highest stat only. It was mostly overpowered, which was counterintuitive. So before, for legendary weapons, what you did is that you split stats with 2 colors, and what you were able to do, because legendary items scaled off with the 2 colors that you have the most stats in. So it was a really interesting strategy. I don't think I've ever done it on camera. For what I can tell, it is pretty overpowered, but the problem is, it's not guaranteed that you will get legendary items very readily throughout all of your runs. It was kind of like, yeah, you get a legendary item, cool. Now I'm gonna do this really interesting strategy. So it looks like they have taken that out of the game, but I don't know if they're gonna add something to that. Next up, added a unique legendary affix to all weapons. A legendary weapon will always have its legendary affix on top of its normal rolled ones. And here are all the possibilities of the respective legendary affixes. There's a bunch here, I don't think I'm gonna go through all of them. Some of them look really interesting though. If you want to take a look at all of the possible combinations, you can just look up the Dead Cells patch notes. I'm not sure what new gameplay this will bring to the table, but I'm really excited to try this out because I barely touched legendary items before this update. And it will also give new players a pretty good incentive to try those out because the old legendaries were not really intuitive on how it's supposed to be used. Like, not all players are gonna figure out, oh, you're supposed to split your stat across your highest 2 colors. And that's how you were supposed to play, so this is a very interesting gameplay change. Now next up, there are a bunch of balancing changes. I probably will get some footage for some of these, but I won't have it for every single weapon on this list, because there is just a lot to go through. Repeated crossbow gets a crit damage nerf. It was overtuned before. I could see it being like the most powerful two-handed crossbow in the game, so it looks like it is gonna get toned down a little bit. Hardlight sword and pistol, slight damage buff to the sword, and attack speed buff to the pistol. I thought it was pretty fine before, but if this is getting buffed, I really can't complain. The Queen's Rapier now has slightly reduced delay on its sliced hits, which I will have some footage in the background. Definitely makes it a little bit more reliable, but in terms of damage, it's already doing pretty well. So again, just a really welcome buff. Maw of the Deep gets a attack speed buff. Maybe I can see myself playing this weapon. I never was a fan of, because the bleed on the final hit just isn't really something that you want to like work towards, especially when you have to go through 2 pretty slow and hefty swings to get there. But we'll have to see. The Wrecking Ball first and last attacks are faster. Yeah, I don't think this is gonna work for me, unfortunately. If you really like the Wrecking Ball, I'm sure this will be a welcome change for a lot of you guys. But personally for me, not really a fan of the Wrecking Ball to begin with. So I don't think my opinion will change too much after this change. Leg Hugger now jumps on a nearby target before launching its reactivation attack, and keeps its growth state across instances of the object in a run. I'm assuming this means that if you find a Leg Hugger at like level 4 or something, and you find a level 10 Leg Hugger and you switch over, now the level 10 will retain the adult state. Because, yeah, I can see this being really annoying, especially because, you know, you kind of have to get a Leg Hugger in like the middle of your run and then carry it to the end. Because if you get a really powerful one at the end of the game, it's still going to be at its like small stage, where it's like tiny, so you're not gonna get too much value out of it. So this is pretty good. Gilded Yumi, charge time slightly reduced and now crits reliably on Mama Tick. I don't think the charge time is exactly the issue. Well, maybe if they decrease the charge time a lot, it might be good. But the main problem with this is still in bosses. If it crits on Mama Tick, that is great, but what about the other ones? Because you really want to crit on the Gilded Yumi. If you can't, then it only so much as tickles the enemy. So, really fun to use in biomes, but you are gonna need a backup plan if you run this into bosses. The Killing Deck, damage buff on the first 2 attacks. I thought this weapon was fine before, but again, a nice damage buff is always welcome. Handhook now also crits on the thrown enemy when it hits another entity. Unfortunately, because of the lack of stun, because of the first 2 swings you have to do before you actually get to the effect, you're still gonna have a stroke trying to use this weapon, so unfortunately, I don't think this is good enough. Greed Shield gets a damage buff and it can trigger once per enemy every 10 seconds. If you really want value out of your runs, then this is a pretty good shield, but if you're on 5 BC, you really can't afford to wait 10 seconds. You really want to get through the biome as fast as possible. So if you work for Activision Blizzard and you really like money, I guess this is something you can run now. The Frantic Sword, now the crit multiplier is inversely proportional to your life. I'm assuming what this means is that the lower your health count is, the more damage this will crit for. But the only problem with that is if you're at like 2% health, that is really risky. Most people when they play this, they're probably going to have like around 50% health anyways, because that's when the damage really starts. Now, I'm not sure how this affects melees. Like, if you have more melees ticks, does this also increase the crit multiplier? Because I would honestly love to see that. Abyssal Trident, slight damage buff. Shrapnel Axis, slight damage buff. Poyo Power now fires 1 more egg and has a damage buff. I think the problem with Poyo Power is that you cannot cancel out of the chicken state by like pressing the thing again. So I think that is what I would personally want for me to actually try it out. But in terms of competitiveness, Poyo Power is okay. It's okay. But because you're so vulnerable as the chicken, you really want to be careful of this, especially on higher boss cell levels. Smoke Bomb and Grappling Hook, scaling heavily nerfed. I understand this, it was pretty busted on bosses, because you could see it bypass the boss damage cap. I've seen some footage of people using the Smoke Bomb and it just instantly killing Scarecrow because the damage multiplier on it is pretty insane. Though the only problem is, Smoke Bomb doesn't really have any applications outside of bosses. It was a pretty risky thing to use, and only select weapons could work with it. It was pretty busted before, but I was okay with it because it was a really niche thing that you could bring into bosses. Now, not anymore, unfortunately. Lightning Bolt now crits 1 tick earlier and damages you 1 tick later. I never done a run with the Lightning Bolt before, but I am assuming this is gonna make it slightly more reliable to use, so that's always good. Spike Shield crit damage buff. Hokuto's Bow procs less often and the bonus damage got nerfed. I'm a little sad about this one, but I can understand because Hokuto's Bow was printed before the backpack update came out. Because of the backpack, you could fit it in there and you could just get free damage bonuses like every single time you fire it, which was pretty busted. So I can understand this nerf. Sonic Carbine got a damage nerf. I was not sure that it was that busted before, but that's fair, I guess. Rapier damage nerf. So I would say the Rapier is one of the most heavy-hitting brutality weapons in the game before. I can see this being nerfed as a way to kind of put everything down a notch to make everything match around the same power level, but I am a little sad to see this being booted off the stage. Boy's Axe, damage nerf, can't have extra ammo anymore. So I'm fine with this because the Boy's Axe is one of the few ways you can actually reliably root bosses. As long as you have the rooting affix, I'm fine with whatever damage nerfs it gets. Hunter's Grenade no longer provides stats. So unfortunately, the Hunter's Grenade memes are dead. You can't really use it in a practical way anymore. Crusher, slow and less effective on bosses. I'm a little sad to see this go as well because Crusher is one of the ways you can stun lock select bosses. So it's not even all of the bosses in the game. I quite like this because if you had something slow like the Wrecking Ball or a recent run that I did with the Oven Axe, you can actually keep up the crits from its crit condition. So it's going to be less reliable now, which means those weapons are also going to be slightly less reliable. Bladed Tonfas, slight nerf of the crit multiplier. I thought it was fine before, but if they think it's a little bit overtuned, so be it. New crit condition for the Crowbar, now crits on monster enemies, non-humanoid and non-mechanic. It still keeps the old crit condition as well. I'm not sure if there is a lore reason why it crits on these select enemies. It does make me think that some biomes are going to be more viable than others if you're running the Crowbar because there will be more monster enemies on these biomes. So I think it keeps the game pretty interesting. Maybe it's viable, but we'll have to see. So that's it for the general changes. Hopefully you enjoyed this slight preview of the newest update. Based on Motion Twin's previous track records, we can expect this update about a month from now. So I'm pretty excited about this because I've seen some of you request it, but I am going to be doing a brand new tier list for version 3.0 of the game, just because it's a nice round number. So stay tuned for more content. I'll have a video essay surrounding roguelikes coming out in the next week, so stay tuned for that, and thank you all for watching.